This is the brand new Pokemon Terapagos, the Indigo Disc that's coming out with Part 2 of the Area Zero DLC. It is the Turtle Disc Pokemon that we've seen in Heath's Expedition Journal, the Scarlet and Violet book, and now everything makes sense. The history of this Pokemon, the lore of the Pokemon world, that video I did explaining the Paradox Pokemon and how they came to be and how they are part of this Pokemon's will, now it all makes sense. It even makes sense, the line where Mrs. Ryfort talks about how the Great Crater is 1,000,000 years old, a line I previously disagreed with her on. But now, actually, everything is clear to me, so let me break down the lore and the story for you right now. Terapagos is 1,000,000 years old, and if you've seen the tweets, and you might have think this is all just a meme, but there are images out there of the Paldea region and how it kind of looks like Terapagos. It looks like it's the exact same shape, with the Great Crater representing the diamond in the middle of the back. The little head can clearly be seen. The tail can be seen where the clouds are in the top right-hand corner of the map. Is it possible that the Paldea region was once a giant Terapagos, or perhaps this very same one that we saw in the DLC? I actually think so. Game Freak doesn't design things like this unintentionally, and I am pretty convinced. Assume this with me, that over 1,000,000 years ago, there was in fact a giant turtle, Terapagos, which by the way is inspired by both the Galapagos turtles, but also the world turtle mythology, the mythology of a turtle who carries the world on its back. This turtle was giant, absolutely huge, possibly the biggest Pokemon we've ever seen, bigger still than Gigantamax or Eternamax Eternatus. It drifted upon an ancient Pokemon sea, and as it grew in size, it didn't have a lot of places left to move, so it docked south of the Kalos region, and there its shell became still enough for Pokemon and people and plants, much like Torterra, which shares the same world turtle inspiration, to grow and begin to thrive on the surface of its shell. It's interesting to note that turtles do in fact shed their shells, and this would be the case with Terapagos, who once settled would stay still for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even 1,000,000 years. Its back becoming an island, its old shell becoming the shape of the Paldea region, as we've seen in the tweets and the memes. And at the core of this Pokemon, on the back of its shell, something special, a power that has allowed it to grow so incredibly big and live so incredibly long, a form of infinity energy. Now, we've seen this throughout the franchise, and no matter what you call it, whether it's infinity energy, whether it's aura, whether it's primal energy, whether it's Gigantamax energy, whether it's the power of the Z crystals, the light that Necrozma produces, or even that of the Ultra Wormhole that allows Pokemon to become big, becoming totem Pokemon, or perhaps the power of Arceus that causes the noble Pokemon and alpha Pokemon to be huge, and we also see this same energy, the Gigantamax energy, transforming Eternatus into the Eternamax Eternatus. We know what this energy is capable of. Generally speaking, no matter what form it takes and what label you give it, it has the same powers. The ability to grow and shrink Pokemon, the ability to power up moves or change the form of a Pokemon, and the ability to manipulate the life force of Pokemon as well. We see this in AZ and AZ's Floette, who have lived for an exceptionally long time, or the Life and Death trio in general, with Xerneas and Yveltal having the power to manipulate life. These I've mentioned before: Zygarde, Eternatus, Necrozma, and now this, Terapagos, I believe is the fourth part of what we call the Arceus, the thing that Arceus gets its name from. But I'll digress from that for now, because I'm sure you've heard about that in my other videos. This enormous turtle was asleep underneath the Paldea region for over 1,000,000 years, and that is how the Great Crater has existed for so long, the peak point that is in that turtle's back. But there was something down there, something that people of other regions wanted, and as I've expressed in my video about the history of the Paradox Pokemon and the history of the Paldea region, I believe this is when the war with Kalos happened 3,000 years ago. The ultimate weapon fired, infinity energy went up into the air, and when it came back down, it was drawn to an incredibly powerful source nearby, the back of the shell of this Pokemon. And what that blast did ultimately was change the Great Crater into Area Zero. I also believe it caused the power of the infinity energy that was sourced there to ripple out across the region, creating terror rage dens and terrestrialization in general. Again, watch that other video to find out more about that. But what effect did it have on Terapagos? Well, in that previous video, I mentioned that perhaps it opened a wormhole which blasted this Pokemon through to another dimension, which is why in Heath's drawing, it appears to be in some other dimensional space. But now, if we're working with the assumption that Terapagos at that time was not a weapon being used by some king of an ancient Paldea, but instead a creature slumbering underneath the Paldea region, the region that used to be its shell, this Pokemon would have been affected by the blast. And I think the key thing that happened to this enormous Pokemon is that it shrunk in size. We don't actually know the current size of Terapagos. It might be, in fact, that it is an exceptionally big Pokemon, but I suspect for game balancing reasons, the Pokemon will not be as big as an entire region. I suspect, struck at the core of its back, this Pokemon shrank, and all of the energy that was inside it was released into the region in the form of Terra energy. In fact, it might be this that changed Terapagos to have all of the elemental types on its back, or it may be the case that it already had that. It doesn't really matter. The point is that at this point, Terapagos left from underneath Area 0. Perhaps by choice, it left into the depths of the ocean, or what's more likely based on the depiction in Heath's journal, flew off into space. We don't know the specific typing of this Pokemon, but it certainly, I wouldn't surprise me if it was dragon and had the ability to fly in some way. It's interesting to note that it was only in a recent game in Pokemon Legend Arceus where Professor Lavington said that Pokemon have a natural ability to shrink, a sort of reverse of Gigantamax and Dynamax, where in the Dynamax raid dens, a big red light kind of spews out of the top of the raid dens, not too dissimilar to the red light that comes out of a Pokeball to then shrink the Pokemon back down. I believe that while Eternatus, which was likely hit 3,000 years ago because that's when the darkest day was as well, flying through the sky became Eternamax Eternatus and grew in size, the opposite was true for such a big Pokemon in Terapagos. Instead, it shrank down and then disappeared into space, into another dimension, or maybe into the depths of the ocean. Perhaps it moved offshore and a new metallic island was built on top of it, and that's the area that we're going to in the DLC. I guess that remains to be seen. But that truly explains how the crater where Area 0 is now is in fact 1,000,000 years old. And in fact, we might be seeing another reference to Gigantamax in the fact that Gigantamax Pokemon are usually depicted with clouds circling around them. And if Terapagos really was once as big as the entire Paldea region before it shed its shell and left this region alone, is it possible that those clouds at the heart of Area 0 are a swirling form of energy similar to Gigantamax? I digress. There is one more bit of evidence that I think is absolutely fantastic that harkens all the way back to the days of Pokemon Red and Blue, and that is in the Pokemon Wartortle, and this is going to blow your mind. For Wartortle, much like Terapagos, is similarly shaped. It's a turtle, and a tortoise instead of a turtle. It has that fluffy tail, which is said to be a symbol of longevity. Why? It is thought that Wartortle in particular, not Blastoise, not Squirtle, is able to live for over 10,000 years. But where would this idea have come from? Well, perhaps it was from the people of Kanto who saw Wartortle and played a little game of mental association all the way back to the ancient stories of Terapagos, a blue turtle that looks not too dissimilar with a big fluffy tail, a sign of longevity, an ancient Pokemon, and that's where the stories of Wartortle come from. And that is how Mrs. Rifle is completely correct in that the crater around Paldea that will one day become known as Area 0 is in fact over 1,000,000 years old, because the Paldea region is the back of an ancient Terapagos, this same one that we'll meet in the DLC that had been struck by the ultimate weapon and ultimately shrunk down. Make sure to subscribe, I'm only giving you my best from now on. So hi, Pokemon Masters.
This is Ash Ketchum. You just watched a video by Birdkeeper Toby. That makes you a Pokemon Master.
Just the biggest thank you to those of you who are supporting this channel on Patreon, and a special thank you to the big patrons of the month, Jedruben, Charmander, Anzabal, Anthony Lee, The Elgator, and Michael Hornshoe. Thank you so much.